had the pleasure of working with Kurt a lot of last year doing interviews and collecting data to produce this case study. There's some hard copies on the table here, but you can also find them on our website. But I'll give a little snippet about kind of what we do to produce these case studies, what they include, and then Kurt's going to do like the detailed walkthrough of our partial budget analysis in that case study. But he has been so kind and sharing with all information and not holding back on anything. So it's been really awesome. It was awesome to work with him. Okay, so our case studies. Since 2020, AFT has published 27 soil health case studies. You'll see on the map the dark green states are where we have at least one and usually two or more case studies. So 2 in Idaho and 1 just recently in eastern Washington. We have 24 that focus on row crops, and they focus on certain soil health practices. So cover crops, reduced till or no-till, nutrient management, and conservation crop rotation. So the case studies are based on the estimated net economic and sometimes environmental benefits of adopting these soil health practices. And so we base the data on interviews with the farmer mostly, and data collected from the farmer. We also use national averages for, say, machinery annual costs and price yields, like 5-year average price yield. So we try to generalize the situation to what other farmers might be able to experience if they adopted those practices. The setup is essentially comparing the previous practices that a farmer used to their current practices. And so it's comparing, just within those soil health practice adoption, what has changed and what is the impact on income and costs, both increases and decreases. Again, we have them available on our website for free. There's also the 2 Idaho ones up here. And usually for these case studies, we try to focus on farmers who have adopted the practices within the last 4 to 15 years. And our rationale there is it takes a few years to necessarily land on exactly what practices, like how you're implementing a certain practice, in order to be able to generalize what those costs and benefits are. And it also takes some time before you really see the economic benefit of certain practices. And so we try to get those folks who have adopted a practice for at least 4 years and no longer than 15, because at that point it really becomes part of like the baseline operational costs and a little bit hard to compare it to what you were doing before. So in that sweet spot of 4 to 15 years. AFT collaborated with NRCS to develop this retrospective soil health economic case study toolkit, which is a mouthful, but it essentially it's free online. We've got an Excel-based tool that we use to produce these case studies to conduct this partial budget analysis. And anybody can go in there, either just tinker with the Excel tool to see what kind of throw in different inputs, see what spits out in the partial budget table, or if folks want to create their own case studies, we kind of have a step-by-step way of creating something that looks very much like what we've done today. So I'm going to pass it off to Kurt to do a little intro on, you already talked a little bit about soil health practices.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
So here at Heglar Creek, we typically, our crop rotation, what we're growing is mostly trit, corn, and hay. We do a few hundred acres of cover crop behind. Like this year we had some trit that we took to yield. We just planted that back into cover crop just recently. So we do some of that for some of our grazing animals. But we're typically a trit, corn, and hay rotation farm. We just grow cow food. We have a dairy. We farm here at Heglar. We have about 4,000 acres. Well, maybe a little. We just rented a neighbor's farm a little bit too. But then we also do have another farm that we help custom farm south of us a little bit more to just try to utilize some more of our equipment, but they have several thousand more down there that we do help put up hay and chop when we have the means to do so. So this case study area was mostly focused on some alfalfa, but mostly that trit corn rotation that we've started to adopt like 5-6 years ago. Just a little bit of background on that. 6 years ago, I started to basically play with the idea of let's try a little bit less with our putting our trip back into our hay. Typically our rotation was take the corn off, we would run like a high-speed disc across there, and then we'd run a deep tillage like our carrot. And for years, when I first was here, we actually didn't double crop any triticale. We just high-speed disc, deep ripped it, and then we just leave it for the spring to plant back into corn or to grain or whatever it was. And we started playing with some double cropping, so we'd high-speed disc, deep rip, and then we'd plant our triticale, and we started falling in love with that. We're like, wow, this triticale is really valuable. We enjoyed it. So we started doing more of that, but at the same time I started doing less. I said, let's try not to do a high-speed disc. So we didn't do a high-speed disc, and we just deep ripped, and that turned out great. And then the next year we started doing no high-speed disc, and then we did about half the fields. Let's try not to deep rip, and let's just take so it was the older Lemkin tool, but we were using that Lemkin. It was called the Solitaire 9. The new one now is called the DT, but it does have a little bit of tillage on the front. We said, let's see if we can just directly plant with that Lemkin into our corn stubble. And so we started doing 5 or 6 fields of that, and that turned out really good as well. So now we have a no-till drill, and whether it's the Lemkin or the no-till drill, we just plant directly behind our corn, and we do rip out our headlands. So like where the trucks have been coming in and out, we usually have 2 circles where we open up the field, and we will go and rip those compacted like highways, and we try to get our trucks, hey, once you're loaded, get onto the road, drive out the road, get to the headland. So we try to keep the traffic in confined areas. So then we go in there with the crot and we do rip those out. So we do have a couple circles and then the headlands that we do rip out, because those do get really hard. But besides that, we've been like 4 years just full blown. We don't till behind our corn anymore. We just go put a cover or a triticale crop right into that. We also, this year I didn't have any alfalfa fields this is talking about reduced till for alfalfa stands, but we actually, years ago, we started doing some no-till into hay stands. And this field out here that we're gonna walk into today was actually my very, very first field that we tried it, but I was too nervous to go full no-till, so I did strip till, and that was like, 6 years ago. And it turned out okay, but I did have 2 strips right in the middle that I said, hey, don't strip those. Let's just no-till into it and see what it looks like. And it looked great. And what I noticed is the biggest visual difference, the corn didn't look any different, but I did notice there were 2 or 3 times as many worms in each root ball. I'd pulling up root balls off the strip till, and I'd find 2 or 3 or 4 worms, and then I'd pull the root ball out of the no-till, and there was like 20. And I'm like, wow, and consistently, right? So I'm just digging up a whole bunch of corn plants. So I'm like, we're definitely disturbing something even with the strip. And so the next year, I actually tilled just the outside, just full tilled the outside ring of a field, and then I no-tilled the rest of the corn field or hay field in the inside. And once again, like I said, I don't want to get too far off subject, but worms and no worms, and then also water penetration and in the hay stand, and then really hard water penetration in the tilled area. So to get to the meat of what Jen was doing on the money side of things, right? This is why we do everything that we do, is to be profitable. My 2 biggest motivations were money, see if I can do less, spend less, and get the same result. And the other thing for me was speed, like, because we push our corn, we're trying to harvest so late. Our average frost date out here is like September 12th. So we harvest way beyond that. And as soon as we take off that corn, we're trying to put triticale right behind it, and we have very few limited growing days left. So my goal is to, within a week, I have compost spread and triticale planted again. And if I had to do a high-speed disc pass and a crop pass, I was basically robbing 2 more days at least of and then I'm losing a bunch of moisture, and it's like, well, then I'm planting into really dry ground. So that was the second motivation, was just timeliness of everything. So there was a huge increase in savings through the tillage, and then a huge increase savings on just the time, but we didn't account for the timeliness of everything. So you're gonna have to help me make sure I don't get this wrong, Jen. Make sure so on our double cropping for triticale, this was like the biggest added benefit. So this is our net increase for growing triticale for us was very cheap. Like, it did not cost us a lot. We actually grow a lot of our triticale seed ourselves now, and so it's fairly cheap. But it is such a valuable crop for us that we were netting, so much more feed with very, very little input. So on average, this is 2.5 dry tons. So wet tons, we're looking at like 7.5 is kind of what we average on that crop before we take off in front of corn. And that varies. The last few years, we've been closer to like 11 tons for that triticale. That's like in the boot, short, young, very digestibility. Like, proteins are at least 16 to 22, but usually in the high teens is usually where that protein's at for that triticale. And then on the hay, we actually interseed. We haven't done it this year because we wanted to bell up our hay this first crop, but we usually would chop our first cutting hay and we would go interseed some triticale into our hay stands at the end of the fall. And especially old stands, they get a huge yield bump because you fill in all these bare spots. And we would put about 60 pounds of seed down, no added water, no added fertility, just put the seed there. Cost us very little to do it with our no-till drill. And we were getting at least 1 extra dry ton. So like when I'm typically chopping my hay in the spring, I was getting 8 to 9 wet tons. I all of a sudden was getting 10 to 12 wet tons. So about 3 extra wet tons was I was getting off of that first cutting of hay. You guys have any questions? Jordan?
On your corn silage yield, you have a percent bump you put there. What do you contribute that to?
Water penetration.
Okay.
Yeah, so we went back and I went and got the most comfortable yields, corn yields that I could say they were good data. And we just went back and we've just been averaging those for as long as we can. And conservatively, we're at a 1, it's more than that. So typically we would always say if we got 25 tons out here, that was usually our mark. Like, we would average 25 tons. If we hit that, we were good. We pay for all of our expenses and we were happy. The last 3 years, we've been at like 28. So more than 1.6%. But I honestly think just because of the water not getting in the ground, we dam or dike at least once, if not twice. In several fields, we dam or dike 3 times just to try to get the water to stop running out of the fields, to not pond. The variance, like, really our corn has just become way more consistent, right? You don't have lows and highs. Everything is just way more consistent, and it's water penetration and there's.
So you don't dike now?
No, yeah, no, none of and we'll walk out here. I do have one field we're going to go to that we planted behind beets, and so beets planted in a straight line. If I ever get a field back that's been tilled or groomed in a straight line, I do till it in a circle because I hate going across tilled straight line because we do everything in a circle. We swath, chop, plant, everything's in a circle. And it gets rough really fast. And we've done that where I've actually planted triticale behind a beet field and didn't rip it. I just went and planted it and groomed it, and it looked great. But that next spring we were swathing, and it was just whoops the whole way around against it. And it was, so we actually said we're taking that trit off or taking the corn off. We went and ripped it in a circle because I'm like, we got to get this set in a circle. So we do rip everything in a circle if it's been. Because we were leasing some ground to our neighbors for the last few years, and so. But yeah, if I have a field like this one, I have one field this year that I planted corn behind beets, and it's bare ground. Ripped it that fall. We planted into flour. I was trying to irrigate it, get it something set, and I had to dike that one. Yeah, but yeah, I don't dike. I don't even have a diker anymore. We've gotten rid of them. So yeah, water penetration. And the other thing, to be honest, there may be this is the visual thing I can see, right? The water. But I honestly think respiration and oxygen penetration in the topsoil is huge, because you think about any living organism, like even us, like how long can we go without oxygen? We're talking a few minutes. Water, we can go days, but plants are the exact same way. They will suffer if you have soil, even if it's soft. And I did this, we're gonna burn a lot of time talking to stuff about this, but that tilled hay field that I tilled that outer ring. it was way soft, but I had a very, very crusted, reflective crust. And when I was talking to soil temps with you about, actually later in the summer, I was getting lower soil temps in that tilled ground than I was in my hay ground when it was about, hay was about this, or corn was about this tall. So all of a sudden I was getting oxygen into my topsoil of 2, 3, 4 inches down, and I was about 7 degrees warmer in my hay stand that I no-tilled into than my reflective, crusty, tilled hay ground that it's just like a blanket, just reflective of oxygen, reflective of heat, and it was sealing it off. And that's what our soil does out here. If we move it and till it and just break up that aggregation, it just will get so fine that the water will just run 100 miles an hour across it, and then we're diking. And that's what we did for when I first got here. That's what we always did, and that's what my dad does. That's what a lot of people do. But I realized this year I am so glad that I don't do it, because I was doing that this year and watching that fill, I was frustrated, and glad I don't do that anymore. Yeah.
What's your average pH and excess lime out here?
So our excess lime, you see those yellow spots? That's excess lime, actually. Colin figured that out for me. What was it last time, Colin? It was like 11 on the excess lime out there on L2 last year. We tested that. That's where, this is actually the old river from years ago when God created this country. He made sure the river went right through here, and that's where typically I fly my drone. But our pH is usually low 8s. Anywhere, we do have a field that'll show 7.9 sometimes, but usually 8 to like 8.3 or maybe 8.4. So low 8s is our pH right now.
When do you typically chop your triticale off?
So it's usually middle of May till the end of May. So like my very last field planted was this one right here. I planted that on June 2nd. And the very first field that I planted behind triticale was May, I could look it up, but it was probably close to May 15th to the 18th or so, right around there. But I did have a few acres that were open. We did some earlage or snaplage last year, and I had a few fields that we're doing that in October, and we just grazed the corn stalks and everything. So I had several hundred acres that didn't have triticale on it, so I was able to start planting, beginning of May. The weather, usually we don't start thinking about planting until like May 5th or 10th out here, just because it's so cold and soil temps are 40, not even thinking about getting to 50. But this year it was good. I was really excited I actually started on May 1st, which I haven't done that for a long, long time. So, but yeah, we usually plant like 80-ish day corn. Like we have tickled in some to the 70s. I feel like we lose a little bit of yield on some of that and some starch. But if I had more corn I was planting in June, I probably would lean towards some more 70-day stuff. But we typically do anywhere from 82s, 89, we're like really shooting for the moon. I did have one field that I planted a 94-day that we're actually gonna go into today, but I planted that on like May 3rd. So I was like, cross my fingers, saying my prayers that, hey, this is gonna be the one. So, so if you look at, it's not to burn more time, but we had so much value in the triticale, and obviously machinery costs from going, so not only were we doing those costs behind the corn stubble, ripping that out, typically we'd go back into the spring and we'd run like a finishing pass, whether it was a high-speed disc or like a roller harrow, and then we'd plant. Looks beautiful, looks great, nothing like what no-till looks like. No-till looks kind of dirty and nasty sometimes, but saving a lot of money. Machinery costs, one less irrigation. So I was also, typically we'd turn off water about a week before corn harvest, let the ground dry down. It was probably like my 3rd year of doing the no-till into the trit. I was like, man, I think I need to turn this off earlier. So I've been doing 2 weeks, and then last year I actually had several fields that I had off for 3 weeks, just trying to make sure the ground, because I don't, one of the things with no-till is you want to manage your moisture so you're not in there creating more problems on yourself, because you can have compaction issues if you go in there and you're just mudding it, right? So I was trying to watch where my moistures are at, and I had several fields that I'd turn them off way early, and I'm just like, yeah, I'm gonna have to get them another drink a few times, and they just never did. I just thought, geez, the profile, I believe, when I dig, is just deeper and larger, right? I'm not working with the top foot anymore. I'm working with a second foot and maybe even a third foot at times. And so like I said, I had several fields that it's crazy. I turn them off in August, and I'm chopping them middle. We didn't start till September 18th last year, and they just sat off for that long, which, at least for us, that's abnormal. That's crazy. We did have, in this case study, we did shift some corn acres around with some hay. So our net income from that was a loss, to recognize that. Cover crop seed and planting, that costs us money, but the cowboys, they pay us so much for grazing, so it's great. So there's our added costs. Conferences. I do highly recommend you guys coming to these things like this, or like this is where I basically got my kickstart. We're going to things like this and seeing how people are doing it, and YouTube, like a lot of YouTube videos. Make sure I didn't miss anything else. Are we good there, Jen?
Yeah, well, I'm curious, so one thing you haven't touched on is the cover crop mix that you've seeded after taking trit off, or no, taking corn off.
No, taking trit off.
Yeah, and grazing those, in the case study it was 100 acres, but.
Yeah, so this year we have like 280 acres that we've done of that. Triticale for us is like super easy to grow. I don't, like, especially if I have it in, if any of you guys have lagoon water accessible to triticale, you can grow triticale without any fertility. Just give it manure water, and I always will out yield my fertility, like synthetic fields that I have to give fertility to versus one that's get manure water. The field that I had within manure water reach this year, it beat it by 5 tons compared to the ones that I gave fertility to. Triticale loves manure water. So if you ever have an opportunity to give manure water to triticale, do it. And then what we do is we'll take that trit off in like around 4th of July. Ours was just after the 4th of July. And we take it all the way till it's like swathed and chopped. Like we don't, I let it cure. It's like turning brown. You're almost thinking it's going to grain, like soft dough. You squeeze the seed, there's like no milk whatsoever. Because I honestly think the most valuable part of trit is in the boot. The second most valuable is soft dough. The in-between is worthless. Like you just don't have any seed, you don't have nothing. You're losing out on all the yield. So I would, if you have opportunities to let that go, just let it go to the very end and take it to like it's turning brown. And when you're swathing, you just want to be chopping like hours or feet behind that swather. Like that's how we do it. Like we'll be chopping, swather stops for the day, the chopper cleans up what is done, and we leave the rest standing, because if it dries for it, like we don't want it to dry any more than it is standing. So we take it to ultimate dryness really and yield on that. But no, the cover crops have been great. Honestly, we've done several fields of these cover crops, and we see added benefits year 2 and year 3. I have a field that I had cover crops on 2 years ago, and it's actually a field that's split. And the one side we cover cropped because it had wheat on it, and this side had corn on it. And right now, the side I planted on this side was a little bit later than the side I had on this side I planted earlier, and it's whooping the other side. And we had that same thing with the wheat. There is huge added benefits with our monocropping strategies that we do out here. When we can throw multi-species out there, I think we really get it. And there's a lot of case studies out there besides what we do that show that there's a 5-year added benefit. Usually they say year 2 and 3 are your biggest gains, but yeah, it's cover crop for us. And I honestly haven't found like my favorite cover crop. This year I've added some buckwheat into it because I did some of that for my neighbor, and he put some buckwheat in it, and I really like that as a grazing crop. But I do oats, buckwheat, some brassicas, turnips and radishes, a clover, peas. Sometimes I do sunflowers just because they look cool, but yeah. So yeah, we really enjoy that. And so I like doing that also for my rotation. We'll be grazing that this fall. and then it gives me a few hundred acres, I actually will just no-till into that cover crop stand with corn the next year. If it's been really muddy and it's getting like completely tracked out, I did this year for the first time, I did take a sunflower disc that's like very vertical tillage and just lightly went across it and just broke up the hoof tracks and the really sharp edges. Years past, I didn't do that, and you think no-tilling's trashy. That was even more trashy because you got, you know, hoof tracks that are 4 inches deep, and we're cleaning really hard. And I don't really like to clean a whole bunch with the planter. And so I just took that tool across there and just kind of groomed and chopped up the residue and took the hoof tracks edges off, and it planted beautifully. And I actually was really satisfied with what that did. Just a little better seed bed for that corn to start. And water penetration was still phenomenal. We didn't like flour the top and crust it over. There's still so much residue, and there's so many worms that are, you know, you go out there and there's a worm castings all across the ground. They're pulling all that old cover crop residue down, and so they're punching holes, making pathways, and I've been really happy with that. Yeah, Steve?
Have you ever planted into the tracks without working them over?
Yep. Yeah, so I did that 2 years ago on our cover crop, and it still good. Like, we still were over 25 ton, but I went out there and I could find a lot of, I bet I would lost at least 2,000 to 3,000 plants per acre just off of seed depth being misplaced, like planting in a hole, planting